Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In today's video, we are going to complete the channel's 5th Oathbreaker deck by installing the land base and adding some mana ramp spells. We will conclude our quest to create an Oko Thief of Crowns Oathbreaker deck that will completely warp the format. What's up, MTG BC, baby? That is the MTG Burgeoning community. Here we are about to complete our 5th Oathbreaker deck around your choice of Oathbreaker in Oko, the Thief of Crowns, and your choice of Oko's signature spell, Simic Charm. We've already installed a good portion of the deck, and today we're going to finish what we started. Very briefly, if you missed any of the previous episodes of this current deck building series, you can click the links in the description below and bring you right up to speed. These are the cards already included in this Oko Oathbreaker build. Ovenize, Turn to Frog, Kasmina's Transmutation, Frogify, Kenrith's Transformation, Imprisoned in the Moon, Ichthyomorphosis, Polymorphist's Jest, Cryptoplasm, Phyrexian Metamorph, Spark Double, Stunt Double, Clone, Vizier of Many Faces, Altered Ego, Daring Thief, Willbreaker, Fogbank, Regrowth, Sword of Sinew and Steel, Mimic Vat, Bioessence Hydra, Feasting Troll King, Pithing Needle, Sorceress Spyglass, Beast Within, Fierce Guardianship, and Force of Vigor. That is the components of the deck thus far, and today we're going to put some mana ramp, install the land base, and put a fork in this Oko Oathbreaker deck. So let's begin with our mana ramp spells. We've got some instants. We've got some artifacts, and, well, we've got some creatures too. So let's start off with those creatures. We're going to start with a Birds of Paradise. There we go. 1 green mana, 0/1 flyer, 1 mana of any color. We would be happy to trade this creature with Oko's ability for a much more threatening source on the battlefield. Don't think for any moment that we haven't already gone ahead and strategized that the early creatures that we cast in this deck that are going to help us to ramp out are also going to be, let's say, fodder for exchanging with our opponents. You can have the Birds of Paradise, and we'll take your questing beast. With that in mind, following up Birds of Paradise, we're going to include a copy of Gilded Goose. Making those food tokens, it's going to help Oko do what Oko does. Plus, it flies, so it can be a chump blocker, and we can use those food tokens for some 1 mana of any color. Arboreal Grazer, 1 green, 0/3 reach, the ultimate in chump block ability, and when it ETBs, we can put a land card from our hand onto the battlefield tapped. It's a wonderful thing being able to cast any one of these creatures on turn 1, and then hopefully casting Oko on turn 2. And continuing with that trend of ramp through spells, of course, through our creatures, we have Coiling Oracle, green and a blue. It's a Snake Elf Druid. For 1 and a 1, when it ETBs, we reveal the top card of our library. If it's a land, it goes into play. If not, we draw a card. Not many better creatures than Coiling Oracle that can fit what we're trying to do in this deck for the purposes of ramp and for the purposes of getting a card into our hand. All right, shifting focus away from creatures to go to our artifact ramp, because we're not going to include any, let me reframe that. We're not going to include an exceedingly large amount of instant and sorcery ramp, because we want to have these things in play that we can exchange with Oko's ability. So including things like Rampant Growth, 3 Visits, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach. Yes, they ramp us with lands onto the battlefield, but we can't exchange those lands and take the full full ability, and we can't maximize Oko's ability because we'll have to pick something else to give. Sending over a useless Coiling Oracle would be perfect, an Arboreal Grazer that's already triggered, or maybe one of the following artifacts, like an Arcane Signet. It is valuable in the early games as we're continuing to ramp, but it's a lot better to exchange over if we're looking to take one of our opponent's biggins. One Arcane Signet taps for 1 mana of any color in our Oathbreaker's color identity, and it's going to be a blue or a green. Speaking of blue and a green, we're going to also include a Talisman of Curiosity. Tap for a colorless, or take a point of damage and tap for a green or a blue. And the last mana rock in this build is going to be a Simic Signet. Mana value of 2, tap 1, turn it sideways. Give us a green or a blue. I'm sorry, give us a green and a blue, not one or the other. We get both with that spell, baby. All right, for the purposes of mana ramp, this is the last spell and the only instant that we're going to include, and that's going to be a copy of Growth Spiral. Green and a blue at instant speed, we can draw a card, and we may put a land from our hand onto the battlefield. So this helps to replace itself and helps us to ramp up. It's powerful enough to include, even though it doesn't really leave anything behind for Oko to exchange. But that's okay because of what it ends up doing for us. It's just too powerful to not include. All right, now it's time to talk about the lands we're going to include in this deck. And there's not going to be a lot of, how do I want to put that? There's not going to be a lot of glamour outside of color fixing and basic lands. We only have 1 land in the deck that's not going to produce colors, and that's because, let's be honest, when Oko gets out into play, he is going to be target number 1. So I can anticipate the need to cast Oko probably 2 to 4 times per game, which with an Oathbreaker tax of 2 each time it's cast, Oko can get pretty pricey. So with that in mind, we're going to include a copy of Command Beacon. It doesn't tap for blue and a green, it only gives us a colorless. However, we can tap and sacrifice this to put Oko from our command zone right into our hand. That way we can cast them from our hand, and we can avoid the additional commander tax that Oko is no doubt going to garner during a game at the Oathbreaker table. So 1 copy of Command Beacon is in. All right, basic lands. We've got 4 islands. Those babies are going in. And if you know MTG Burgeoning, you know about symmetry. So if there's 4 islands in a 2-color deck, well, you know we're going to have 4 forests as well. 4 islands, 4 forests, and 1 Command Beacon. The rest of the mana base is dedicated to cards that can tap for 1 of any of the 2 colors that we need to get our Oathbreaker deck online. So let's whip through them real quick, and let's bring this deck building series to a close. Whoops. We have a Botanical Sanctum. Comes into play tapped unless we control 2 or fewer other lands. So this is definitely a land we would love to see in our opening hand. Wish you could see it. There we go, camera. This is a land we want to see in our opening hand every single game because we can put it into play just like it's an original dual land and we don't have to worry about it coming into play tapped. Anything later in the game and we're looking for a land, this is probably not the one we want to draw because, let's be honest, there's going to be more times than not that we draw this land later in the game as opposed to being in our opening hand. It's good enough as a risk, so we're going to include it, but we'll keep an eye on Botanical Sanctum because for the purposes of this blue-green build and our Oathbreaker that only costs 3, speed and ramp is going to be our advantage. So we'll have to keep a close eye on Botanical Sanctum just to make sure it doesn't gum up what we're trying to accomplish. We have our Simic Checkland in the form of Hinterland Harbor. Gives us a green or a blue. Comes into play untapped as long as we control a forest or an island. This feat will be a lot easier to accomplish than that of Botanical Sanctum, so I'm pretty confident that we won't have too many problems with Hinterland Harbor. Yavimaya Coast is our Simic Pain land. We can tap for a colorless, or we can turn it sideways, take a point of damage, and add a green or a blue to our mana pool. Next up, we are going to play with our Simic Pathway, which is Bark Channel Pathway on the front side, which gives us a green, or we can put it into play with the Tide Channel Pathway instead and tap it for a blue. We get to pick. The only concern is that once it's in play, it has to tap for the mana that we choose. We don't get the option of going back and forth. And this card, this is the one that I'm most uneasy putting in, but I do believe that its ETB trigger for the purposes of what we're trying to do with this deck may be valuable enough to warrant its inclusion in the 58, and that's going to be a copy of Temple of Mystery. I historically and generally I'm not a fan of lands. I am not a fan of lands that come into play tapped. Come on, camera, get in the game here. There we go. I am historically not a fan of lands that enter the battlefield tapped under all circumstances. So including something like a temple, it raises my anxiety level a little bit with the purposes of trying to streamline this deck to make it as fast and powerful as possible. The only way in which I was able to convince myself to give this land a whirl in this build is because of its scry ability. We want to make sure that we have the choice spells needed in order to interact with our opponent's boards, keep Oko safe, and make sure that we can control the entire battlefield. The ETB of Scrying 1, I'm hoping, will be powerful enough of an ability to make this land come into play tapped okay. Temple of Mystery is going to be on the watch list. It is land number 1B after the Botanical Sanctum of 1A. Next up, we're going to include our Simic Filter land, Flooded Grove. You're going in the game. Tap for a colorless or tap a green or a blue, and then add 2 mana of any combination of Simic colors. Love those filter lands. Why are they not more popular? Next card we're going to include the Simic Fanland, Waterlogged Grove from Modern Horizons 1. Tap, pay a life, add a green or a blue, or tap 1, sacrifice it to draw a card. Waterlogged Grove may cost us a little bit of life, but we've got food tokens all over the place. We can sack one of them, and we will be able to withstand 3 pay. We will be able to replace 3 life paid by using the Waterlogged Grove for mana 3 times. Next up, we are going to include our fan land of Rejuvenating Springs from Commander Legends. This enters the battlefield untapped if we have 2 or more opponents, and if we're sitting down in an Oathbreaker table, we most likely will. So this, similar to what we were talking about with Botanical Sanctum, this seems like it's going to come into play untapped a lot more than Botanical Sanctum, so it's a lot easier to justify playing that card than it is either Temple of Mystery or the Botanical Sanctum. Next, we are going to play with one of the newest Simic lands in Vineglimmer Snarl. Now, this completes the cycle of lands that was first introduced in Shadows over Innistrad. They weren't called Snarls back then, but that's just the name given to this card from Strixhaven. So what we have here is it enters the battlefield. If we reveal a forest or an island card, it enters the battlefield untapped. So as long as we can show any kind of forest or island, it does not have to be a basic land. So we could show one of our, breeding pools or any of our forests or islands. That's really the only other lands we can show outside of our breeding pool, which we're going to get to in a moment. So if we have one of those, Vineglimmer Snarl is a great card to have in our opening hand. Maybe not so much if we're trying to top deck something. All right, speaking of breeding pool, there it is. That's our Simic Shockland. Pay 2 life as it ETBs, tap for a blue, or tap for a green. And lastly, the last 2 lands are just going to be, the standard. We've got a command tower going in. It's going to give us a blue or a green. It's the best land in the format. And similar to command tower, we're going to put in a reflecting pool. I can't imagine many scenarios where this does not provide us with a blue or a green. So those are the last 2 lands we're going to include in this video. And that's going to complete MTG Burgeoning's 5th Oathbreaker deck. This is Oko, Thief of Crowns, with a signature spell of Simic Charm, chosen by you, the MTGBC. Let me know what you think of the finalized build in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.